Good evening again, everybody. And for our Monday night in Motherwell, this is a fantastic scene of eager faces to be looking out on in this wonderful space. People who have braved even the Sahara sandstorms to get here. This is a meeting by the Lancashire Forum for Independence. My name is Alan Crockett. I'm one of those that help out the forum. The forum was started some time ago with a view to getting the arguments for an independent Scotland as widely broadcast in the area as possible, and to provide the opportunity for people to discuss the issues irrespective of their background, their party, or whatever. And the only aim is really to advance the cause of independence for the forthcoming referendum. This is, I think, the fifth meeting that the forum has held, and we're hoping to hold some more in the near future. And the idea is just to get everyone as well informed as possible on the issues. Can I just tell you that this event this evening is being live streamed. We're very grateful to Independence Live for doing that, and also to Dave Cherry from Cherryman Media, who's also helping out. Could I just ask you, there's a camera over there with a fellow in the room at the top, standing beside it. If anyone's up asking questions or whatever, don't stand in front of that camera, because the viewers will see nothing else except your back. I'm sure you give a very warm welcome to the speakers we've got for you tonight, but I suspect that most of you here are already kind of on the yes side. But in spite of that, could I ask you, please don't give them an easy time when it comes to questions. Any doubts or concerns that you've got, don't hold back. And have a fantastic evening. I just want to hand you over now to the chairman for the evening. It's John Milligan. He is the stalwart of the Lancashire Forum for Independence. And have a good time, everybody, and take it away, John.
Thanks, Alan. I don't know about that stalwart, but this is one of those occasions where the child is the father of the man, and with respect of the younger guys in the town here who decided to kick this initiative off. And fair play, and it's a pleasure and privilege to be associated with the campaign. Well, I want to open my remarks tonight, ladies and gentlemen, to pay a comment or two about, as you know, Bob Crow was invited guest here, the General Secretary of the RIT Trade Union, who tragically suddenly passed away just 3 weeks ago at the early age of 52 years. And true to our traditional hospitality, we believe it appropriate that from this meeting tonight, we send condolences to Bob's partner Mickey, his children and grandchildren, family and friends, and extend our best wishes to members of the RIT Trade Union, and I'm one of them, who have lost an inspirational leader. But Bob's advocacy on behalf of working people was not confined to acting solely for members of the RIT. He believed in justice and fairness for ordinary men and women at home and throughout the world. He practiced his trade unionist, anti-fascist and socialist beliefs in his commitment to lend solidarity and support wherever it was needed. Attending his funeral last Monday, you could see and actually feel the high regard in which he was held, because people recognised that he was a guy who had taken up the challenge on their behalf. Trade unionists from England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and across the world joined with pensioners groups, campaigners against austerity, campaigners against nuclear weapons, campaigners against wars, individual citizens, solidarity groups on behalf of Cuba, Venezuela, Palestine, and the rest were there to pay tribute. Bob understood completely where the source of the problem for working people lay. And he took the challenge to the establishment with courage and conviction. You could even say he was audacious, a word used by Sillars in his book, in place of fear too, saying that if we are to succeed, we too must be audacious. Bob knew the source of the problem, the Westminster Consensus and its support for the failed economic model. That is why he embraced the cause which we are discussing tonight, the cause of Scottish independence. His position was that an independent Scotland, taking the opportunity to build a more just and equitable society, would act as a beacon to the rest of Britain, and as such would be in the interest of solidarity with working people throughout these islands and abroad. But Bob was no stranger to Scotland, and in recent times was an enthusiastic supporter of the Scottish independence, as our union conducted a consultation on the issue with our members at meetings throughout the country, declaring that if he lived in Scotland, he would vote yes on the 18th of September. A position we will no doubt have conveyed tonight. He had visited Motherwell many times, and the last time I spoke to him was on the eve of his death. He was really looking forward to coming here and being involved in the debate. We have lost a true comrade and friend. But in many respects, he is here. He is here. His legacy to continue the struggle. I know that he would have completely accepted and endorsed the words, "Don't mourn, organise." Don't mourn, organise. And that's what we'll be doing tonight, putting the case, looking to convince, and going forward, organising for an independent Scotland. These will be the views of Bob. Just to go on to the business of the evening, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting is open to all, decided or undecided. We trust that we will have an informative, forthright and open discussion, as Alan has indicated, within which we can engage on the issues surrounding the referendum vote. The topic tonight, independence, is not an end in itself. Because the meeting tonight is an opportunity for all of us, not only to hear why we should have an independent Scotland, but also what that independent Scotland can bring. What opportunities come with the power of an independent Scotland? How can we develop a more fair and just society? How can we use the material resources of the country in combination with the intelligence of its people so that future generations can prosper? What are the consequences of a no vote on the 18th of September? Jim Sillars comments in his book that, I quote, "Independence does not mean more of the same, with the only difference being that the saltire flies alone on public buildings instead of alongside the Union flag." Robin McAlpine, under the title "All of Us First," argues the concept and opportunities through the common weal. The common weal is an old Scots phrase, you know, which means well shared in common and the well-being of all. And Cat Boyd campaigns under the Radical Independence Campaign slogan of "Another Scotland is possible." And these panel of speakers will get an opportunity in a second or two to convey all that entails. So the format of the meeting just now then is each of the speakers will have 10 to 15 minutes to make their presentation, and then we will open up the meeting to a questions and answer session, at the conclusion of which the speakers will have 5 minutes each to wind up. And we will conclude on Wednesday morning at 10:30. Unfortunately, I bring a big piece of money, right? We'll conclude at a reasonable time. So I'm going to call the first speaker, and when we get to the question and answer session, please bear in mind I've been advised by the technical guys that wait till you get the microphone, the mobile microphone in front of you, before you ask your question so they can pick the sound up, because they're going worldwide, but famous by the modern one. So the first speaker I'm going to call upon is Robin McAlpine. Robin is the director of the Jimmy Reid Foundation and editor of the Labour Left Review. A very busy guy, and a number of meetings that Robin's doing, and the other colleagues here tonight would make you blush. I remember going over to Atlanta quite recently, and he had a meeting starting at 7:30, and he had a meeting at Stonehouse at 7:30 as well. I listened to him very well, it's done well. Where are you up to? I didn't know there was a time barrier between them. And the back way you went to Stonehouse. Well, some people argue that's the case. That's not the case. Anyway, I'm going to bring up Robin and to make his presentation. Thank you very much.
I would never have made it to Stonehouse if it wasn't for my helicopter. But before I start, I just want to say one really simple thing about Bob Crow. The left have lots of people that can make a good speech. We can never have enough people that win for working people, and that's why I think Bob Crow is an important figure for us not to forget, because he can talk, but he can win, and it's time that we started winning. The reason it's time we started winning is because we've been losing for far too long. There was one day last year, and I'm going to sit down on my calendar and try and work out exactly when it was, but there was one day last year when the time that Britain spent building up its welfare state was overtaken by the time that Britain has spent undoing its welfare state. From 1945 to 1979, we built a country which was decent for the people, the working people that lived in it. We built a welfare state, we changed the economy, we tackled poverty seriously, we tackled poor housing seriously, we changed the lives of the people of this country for good. And since 1979, everything we did, nationalisation, get rid of means testing, universalism, public services investment, making sure that there's good quality rental housing for people. All of those things have been consistently undone ever since, which is why I get so sick to that back teeth in another pious lecture from somebody in Better Together telling me to stay in Britain so that the broadest shoulders can carry the burden. The only burden the broadest shoulders seem to me to be carrying is bags full of money. Because I can't see what the hell they're contributing to the lives of the vast majority of people in this country just now, their tax dodging and the lack of participation and the way that they distort the political process. It's no good enough. We've all come to believe that it's normal, that it's usual, that it's like this. Well, let's have a look and see what normal actually looks like, how normal Britain is. So, a working person in Britain, they will be in the second lowest paid economy of all the advanced economies in the world. They'll be working the third longest hours of anyone in Europe. And of all the countries in Europe, there's only 3 countries where the wages of a working person have fallen faster since the economic crisis than in Britain. If you're a woman, you're in a country with the 8th biggest gap between male and female earnings. You're paying the highest cost for childcare. If you're a pensioner, you've got the lowest pension in Europe, and you're the third most likely to be in poverty. If you're a child, you will be in the country where children in a WHO survey came absolutely bottom of the league table of developed nations for happiness. That's the reality of what we created with this Britain that we've been building for the last 35 years. That Britain is based on the belief that only the biggest and the strongest have any right to win. And if they win, the rest of us ought to be glad. You put 2 people in a room in Britain, and one of them comes out alive, that person must be the best that we can possibly have. And it's destroying our society, it's destroying our lives. And we can't stand about any longer looking at this and saying it's alright. Because one of the other things that Britain does is it tries to make you believe that that's how it is and there's nothing we can do anymore. Oh, it's a global trend. Oh, it's an international phenomenon that are causing this. It's not. I've just shown you in a few simple statistics how bad Britain is compared to everybody else. How poor life is in Britain for ordinary working people compared to even countries like Bulgaria and Romania where the pension's better than ours. They've got happier kids than us in these countries. You're less likely to end up in pension or poverty if you live in Estonia than you are here. So it's time we woke up to the reality of what Britain has become. And it's also time that we woke up to the reality of what Scotland could be. Now, one thing I'm going to say here, Britain could be this too. Britain could turn itself round if there was even a modicum of the will among the politicians in Britain to do anything about it. But there isn't. Because they're all bought into one belief that a political philosophy that says let the biggest win is the only way that you can move forward as a society. It's not. You can have me first politics. We've had me first politics for 40 years and we all came second. It's time that we had politics that put all of us first, and that's what Commonwealth's about. So how do you do it? Because I want to focus everybody's mind on one question, which is, we've heard a lot about the kind of country, and I'm waggling my fingers about like this, because it all seems hell of a vague to me, the kind of country of fairness and decency that everyone says they want to have. I hear very little from the other side about what that actually entails, what are you actually going to do to make that country happen. And so I'm going about every meeting that anyone invites me to come to say the following things. We know what the people say they want from their lives. We know what we need to do to give them that. We have all the knowledge and the expertise in this country that we need. We have all the resources and all the wealth in this country to do that we need. And we have, in my view, an absolutely strong and undeniable political majority that means if we can get our country back, who's going to stop us from doing these things? So, what do people say they want? Meaningful work. This is so important. Meaningful work. Not the money. The sense that when you get up in the morning and you go to your work, you can feel proud about yourself because you're doing something worthwhile. A home. Somewhere to live. Somewhere nice to be. Security. The knowledge at the end of the month you can feed your family, that you can pay your bills. Your health. A sense of community. A sense that you're living with people that care, that you can care about, that you're part of something. That's more or less all that people say they want. And why can they not have it? Because it's too expensive. Apparently, too expensive. You can't afford the public services, the social investment, the economy which would give them this stuff. We can't afford it, but we bloody can. And I'll tell you how we can. We can by being not the lowest paid, second lowest paid economy among the advanced economies. So somebody will hear me say this before. Imagine what a decent salary that would let you have that life is, that meaningful work, that home, that security. You can pay your bills, you can participate, you're not relying on tax credits. What would that salary be? 25,000 to 35,000 pounds? Well, of everybody in Scotland today who's working, only 1 in 5 earns between 25,000 and 35,000 pounds. 3 out of 5 working Scots earn less than 25,000 pounds a year, and half of everybody in working Scotland at the end of this year won't have made 21,000 pounds. We wonder why we can't afford our public services when we've got people that can't afford to live without tax credits. We've got a low-pay economy. And if it wasn't like that, it would be substantially different for all of us. We've got a paper on our website. I always forget to tell people the website. It's reidfoundation.org is where you'll find all of our papers. And the Commonwealth website is allofusfirst.org, where all those papers are translated into language, which is perhaps a little easier to understand. Some of them are very technical. But we took this paper and we said, let's try and find out what this low-pay economy means to everybody. And we said, let's not imagine that we've grown the economy. The economy gets no bigger, but we distribute the wages in that economy fairly in the way that they do in a Nordic country. So we took away the massive pay at the top, we got rid of the low pay in the middle, we compressed the pay so it was flatter, and we got the number of people into work that you have in a Nordic country, the low levels of unemployment. We did just that. We ran the tax model again, and it generates £4 billion of additional income without touching tax rates. We don't have a problem with too much public expenditure. We have a problem with too low wages in the pockets of our people. And why? And why is that? Because we allow this conflict model, this bully model, to be the dominant model of everything that we do. So if somebody can build a shed in a field and buy lots of cheap retail goods from China and fill that shed and sell it to you, and if in the process that out-of-town shopping centre can close down all your high streets, you should be glad. You should be delighted because the biggest guy won and that's what's good for you. But if you're a youngster, try to get your on the property ladder, buy your first house, you'll presumably be delighted that 7 out of 10 richest people in this country are property developers who got rich by controlling the land on which houses are built to push house prices higher and higher so that they get rich and you don't. Or perhaps you'll be delighted at our banking sector, which we've even found now. And I've got to say the Libor scandal was horrendous, but there's something almost worse to discover, that some of our banks were deliberately bankrupting small businesses so that they could sell off their assets for a rapid profit. And I find that truly genuinely disgusting. We've got an economy which makes its money from your pockets. Because retail doesn't make value, it just takes value from you. And property doesn't make value, it takes value from you and your rents. And the banking sector hasn't been making value, it's been taking value out of you through exploitation. And all these jobs, all these wealth-grabbing jobs in industries, they don't create good jobs because you don't need skills to do any of these things. If you're using an exploitative economy in which all you've got to do is put a Chinese t-shirt on a shelf and get somebody to buy it for twice the price you paid for it, you don't have to pay anybody because that's not skilled. It's an extremely useful industry if you want to make yourself a lot of money in your corporation, and it's an absolutely rubbish industry if you want to feed your family. And we need to change that. We need to build an economy which is not based on low-paid, exploitative jobs, but which is built on high-paid, productive jobs, because Britain is a country in denial about its economic situation. We are 16 percentage points behind the average productivity of an advanced economy. We have desperately low rates of innovation. Our balance of trade is terrible. These old measures of economic health, productivity, how much you make, balance of trade, how much you sell, innovation, how much better you get, these measures don't even get discussed in Britain now. All we talk about is an economy based on high street footfall and house prices. It's madness. We have got to get out of this corrosive, psychotic system which measures your success by how well the rich do, how well the corporations do, how well the big do. That's no future for us. That's no future for any of us. We have to build a productive economy. Because when you make things, and when you do things, and when you create the value in your economy, not simply by marking up what something else did, but through what we do, what we build with our hands, then suddenly that economy is an economy where you pay people. Because when you make value, when you create things, when you build things, it's your skill that adds the value. It's the worker's skill that makes the wealth in the economy. And when it's skill that creates wealth, you pay people because they're worth paying. We have to move from one economy to another, and the City of London will never let us do it. It is not good enough for anybody down there to say, we'd like to have a high-pay economy, or we'd like to have a productive economy. Because even if they were serious, they wouldn't get the permission from the City of London. But we can here. We have to do what people do when they want to change their economy and make it better. We need an industrial policy. We need a policy that says the economy is not beyond democracy, something you can't touch, something you have to sit and you have to accept, and that's it. We can put in place an industrial policy which says, no, our economy is part of our society, and our society is a democratic society, and if we want to have a high-pay economy, no corporation is going to tell us we're not allowed to try. So what we have to do, there's no time to talk about this. The industrial policy paper in itself is insanely big. What we have to do is put in place the things which will help that economy to grow. A national investment bank. We've got to use procurement to build up big, strong industries. We need to support small independent industries in this country, stop allowing the big manufacturers the big retailers to put them out of business. We have to start investing, because this is another shocking fact. Britain, if you take all the investment that's being made in Britain just now, that's public and private sector, all of it, it's not even zero. Now that sounds like it's mad, that sounds impossible. No, but it is. The rate at which the infrastructure, public and private infrastructure of this country is declining is faster than the rate that we're investing in it. If Scotland becomes independent, we need to invest £5 billion a year just to get to the European average of the investment in our economy. And my God, that can't be our only hope to be average. We have to start investing in this country, and we have to do it properly. Because that austerity agenda, which tells you you can't borrow, you've got to live within your means, is a lie. No, we shouldn't be running deficits. Deficits are bad. I don't support Gordon Brown's use of borrowing to cover a faulty economy which wasn't given enough money to sustain public services. That's bad. We must get out of deficit on our revenue expenditure. But that's not the same thing as saying that for the long term we borrow because it works. And it does work. Every period when Britain's had its best economic outcomes, we were borrowing to invest. So whether that's a national company borrowing heavily to invest in housing, but based on the income that those houses are going to produce in rent over the next 50 years, or whether it's borrowing for a national energy company, which is going to repay that borrowing through the guaranteed income that you get from energy generation. We're still going to be needing electricity over the next 20 years. That income is guaranteed. So the question is, do you want a foreign multinational company to capture all of that wealth on the basis of buying cheap turbines from China, or are we going to bring it back here? Are we going to own our grid? Are we going to build our own energy infrastructure, make our own turbines, make our own energy storage facilities and generation capacity in this country with our hands, because we can borrow to do that with no difficulty. There is no question that we will be able to repay anything that we borrow to do that. There are tens of thousands of extremely high quality jobs for people if we can just do these things. So if we can create a productive economy, if we can create that economy, we can create good jobs, and good jobs pay well. Jobs that pay well create prosperous citizens. Prosperous citizens pay their taxes, and that makes strong public finances, which we can invest in infrastructure and public services, which create the strong social cohesion that creates the country that people say they want to live in, a country that cares for each other, where you're part of a community with your neighbour. We can do all these things. There is a model which delivers this. Now, later this week, on Thursday, we've got a conference with well over 100 academics. It is insane, but we are trying to get a full 50 major reports out before this referendum. We're about halfway there. These reports cover everything, from tax and spend to budgeting to finance to housing, all the way through to social policy and how we treat our children. It's a full programme for the transformation of Scotland. We are going to have these 50 papers ready for early May, where we're going to write them up as one simple story, which says anyone that tells you that this is as good as it gets, wrong. Here's a tale, here's a story which will explain to you how we get from this place to somewhere better. So don't come back to me and tell me that only the broader shoulders of Britain is the option that we've got for transforming this country. And I can only say it again, 40 years of me first politics, and Nanny has won. And I'm sick of losing, and I'm sick of watching other people lose. I am not going to stand around waiting for Labour to get its act together and shake us all up in Britain like they promised they're going to do every 5 minutes, and then roll straight back from 5 minutes later. If we can't change if we don't change it, we have to, because this is a democracy. And if this is what we want, we can take it. So we have all the knowledge about what our people want. We have all the expertise to give them it. We have all the resources in this country necessary to make it happen. And we have an absolutely firm democratic majority to put that in place. The only thing that we need to create that Commonwealth Scotland is the capacity to do it. We need a yes vote to have the powers. And if we do, we can transform this country. It can be a country that puts all of us first. Thank you.
Kat's in the Radical Independence campaign. She's a trade union activist. She's also a very busy person indeed, meetings, campaigns, conferences, etc. and so on. And so, welcome, Kat.
Thanks very much for inviting me today. It's a real privilege to be here, and what a turnout, it's absolutely amazing. I've been involved in the Radical Independence campaign, and what that is, right, well, it's not a political party, right, it's not a think tank, it's not just an organisation that puts on conferences, it's a broad coalition of pro-independence activists from the left of the political spectrum. Some people who are members of some party, some members of no party, people who've never voted in their life, disaffected Labour voters, a really broad range of people. And the reason we set it up was to make sure that ideas about social justice and about a society that's nuclear free were getting out onto the streets. And we thought what our job is over this referendum is to convince as many people as possible that a vote for independence isn't just a vote in a referendum, but a vote for them, a vote for Scotland, and a vote for real change. So I guess for me, what this referendum represents is, it's not just a debate about the normal politics, the day-to-day stuff. It's not about Labour versus the SNP, and I get really frustrated when I see that all the time in the media. That seems to be how they're trying to frame it. For me, this is a debate for normal people, for ordinary people, and this referendum has opened up just a tiny little space, a wee chance for us, for people in Scotland, to move away from a system that has created despair and misery for so long. And it's a small gap in that political system that begins to open up for us in the referendum. The Radical Independence Campaign held a conference, our second conference, at the end of November last year, and the themes of that conference were summed up in sort of 3 sections, and that's how the conference was structured. And we talked about failure, hope, and transformation. And that's kind of like that. These words sort of reflect my own journey and how I came to be a supporter for independence. And I want to start by saying, on that topic of failure, I think we need to be honest. Britain has failed. It has failed me, it's failed my generation, the generations that came before it, and it will continue to fail generations that come after it. And it's failed in 3 ways: economically, socially, and politically. For me, sort of at the beginning of my journey to becoming a supporter for independence, I was 11 years old in 1997, and I've got this really clear memory of my dad. My dad's a long-time Labour Party member, a long-time Labour Party supporter, as are most of my family. And I remember when Tony Blair won in 97, I remember my dad waking me up the next day and being like, "Oh, we won, the good guys are back in." Honestly. And he was honestly so full of hope and expectation at what was going to happen. And for us, that government came to represent something very, very different. And it's really significant, like the meetings that I've done in the last few weeks. It was 11 years ago on the 20th of March, just a couple of weeks ago, 11 years ago, when we saw the skies of Baghdad light up orange, and our brothers and our sisters and our sons and our daughters killing fighting in the Europe. That was the time for me where I realised that Britain was failing. And that gap, that wee gap I was talking about that opens up with independence, that's a gap, it's a space for Scotland as an independent nation to stand internationally for peace and not for war. Today we're 11 years on from that moment, and we've got another government at Westminster, and that's a government that's still intent on waging war, and that war they are waging is against ordinary people. That's the war that they're waging at Westminster. I said Britain's failed economically, and these are the things that Robin was talking about as well. Britain is one of the richest countries in the developed world, and it's also one of the most unequal societies. The Sunday Times Rich List, their wealth continues to grow even after the economic collapse of 2008, and average workers' wages rise 0.8%. There are attacks on social security, attacks on the welfare state, the privatisation of the NHS, these cuts being made on ordinary people because they have to pay for the mistakes made at the City of London. Now, the whole, and this is something that Robin covered as well, the entire economic structure of Britain is failing, and Scotland's got a unique opportunity to move away from that economic model that's run on greed, debt, speculation, trading in derivatives, that kind of shadow economy, you know, that emanates out of the City of London. That type of economic system, basically what it's done is it's taken the wealth that's created from all over these islands, from everywhere, from Aberdeen to Liverpool. It takes all of the wealth created by normal people and pulls it right down into the City of London. It pulls it right down and makes that banking class, that unregulated banking class, even richer, and it makes all of us pay the brunt of the cuts of austerity. Now, Tony Benn is someone, for me, I always found really inspiring, and I was really sad at his passing. I didn't always agree with him on his position on independence, but he said something I remember, and he said something about Britain that I thought was really telling. He said, this country has an utter contempt for skill. It has an utter contempt for skill. And that was during the Thatcher years, when she made that model of finance capitalism, the bankers at the City of London, build up, and all we saw was an utter contempt for skill. I was speaking to a woman just before the meeting started, and we talked about Ravenscraig. And I remember Ravenscraig. I'm from Hamilton originally, and we used to live right high up in Hamilton. And I remember going over to the park, and you could see right over, great skyline view, and all the neighbours, we all came out of our houses and stood on the top of a hill, and we watched it be demolished. We watched that fall, we watched that industry fall apart. And for me, in this moment, there is not one party at Westminster that is committed to changing the structure of the economy. There is not one party at Westminster that wants to make a productive economy, or that wants to say skill is a good thing, and we want to pay people well for the things that they make. There's not one party. And I think if we don't move now, and this is what I always say to people who are voting no, if we don't move now, if we don't vote yes, then that path of economic failure will continue. And some people say, we've got to remain together, united, we can win, we're better together. But I always say to them, no, united, we have achieved some of the worst regression in terms of social and economic equality. It's actually shameful that a country as rich as Britain has regressed so far. And Robin also covered these things. I think we're on a similar page. We do work with the Commonwealth quite a lot. The other ways that Britain's failed, it's failed socially. The standards of living in our country are terrible. They are terrible. It's the third highest housing costs in Europe, the highest rail prices in Europe, and the second worst in Europe for fuel poverty. As Robin said, we've got the least happy children in the developed world, and we've got some of the worst poverty in old age. And it's also failed politically, and I think this is a really important thing for me, that Britain's failed politically, because I've always really struggled at elections, because I'm always like, I don't know who to vote for, because I've got these ideas for change, and that's the referendum for me opens up a chance for real change, and Britain's failed politically. And I just want to explain exactly what I mean by that. People talk about public opinion, right? So you hear it in the newspapers all the time, the public, the general public, etc., etc. Well, let's look at the general public. And this is across the UK. 12-1 against the privatisation of the NHS. 67% in favour of a public Royal Mail. 66% backing rail nationalisation. 68% for nationalising energy companies. But no party at Westminster represents those views. No party at Westminster is putting those policies out there. And it is the system of British democracy that we've got a House of Lords, for God's sake. It's that system of British democracy that pulls always rightwards. It is that system that's stealing the chance for change for ordinary people. In September, we've got a chance, a real hope, a real chance to change the path that we're on about that economic failure, societal failure and political failure. And I honestly feel for the first time like I've got something to vote for. Austerity at home and a war on ordinary people and war abroad, these aren't the best things that we can expect. And I refuse to be told that us, the people in this room, are too wee, too poor and too stupid to succeed in changing the world. And I see this all the time in the Scottish media, and they're always talking about, can you afford it? Not sure you've got enough wealth. Well, we're wealthy anyway, of course, as a nation. We've got resources and we've got people. But since when did politics become about how rich a nation is and not about how that wealth is distributed amongst its citizens? And that's the thing, Jimmy Reid once said, the untapped potential of our North Sea oil is nothing in comparison to the untapped potential of our people. And that's the spirit that I think is really, really important around this referendum. And regardless of the colour at Westminster, the colour of the government at Westminster, it will always be at war with ordinary citizens. It only represents the interests of the rich. And if we vote yes, I think we're starting to win that argument. We will have to, fight for what we want, for the changes that we want to see. So we know that Britain's failed. We know that the referendum brings us hope. And I kind of I have this picture in my head of the things that I want to see. And I don't think, we're called the Radical Independence Campaign, but I don't think our ideas are that radical, to be honest. I don't think it's too much to ask for free childcare and well-paid, skilled jobs, a properly funded social security system. That's easily paid for. Of course it is. You don't need to be an academic or write a policy paper to know that if you had better taxation, you scrapped Trident and you stopped squandering resources, then these things are perfectly affordable. It's not a question of, balancing the books, it's a question of priorities. I refuse to accept that what we've got now is the best that we can accept. And it's given us this opportunity to go out and talk to people about that. The privilege of having the opportunity to go out and say to someone, what sort of country do you want? Is incredible. It's something that's been really powerful. And to people who are thinking about voting no, it's not going to bring certainty. A future in the UK is uncertain. There's a European Union referendum, there's the rise of UKIP, all the parties at Westminster promise more cuts. There's nothing else on the table. And to those of us in this room, I think that's probably the majority who are voting yes. I think we should keep this in mind. And I want to be honest about it. I don't think we're going to get a landslide victory. I don't think we're going to, see the polls on September the 18th and it be 75% yes, 80% yes. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't care. I just want to tip it over the edge. Just tip it over. That's what I want. Everyone in this room who is voting yes, that's our goal. It's, I always feel quite humbled being asked to come and speak at things, but I'm by no means an expert. I don't pretend I've got all the answers. We've got a role to play. We've all got a role to play in convincing our friends, our colleagues, our families, our neighbours. Get out, knock the doors, speak to people on the streets, in the supermarket, whatever it takes. And we have to ask ourselves, do we have what it takes? Do we have what it takes, not just to win the referendum, but to win Scotland for its people? Because the yes vote on September the 18th is just the beginning for me. And at the heart of all this stuff, at the heart of all the meetings and the canvassing and the Yes campaign and the Radical Independence campaign and the Common Weal and everything, it lies the conviction this isn't politics as normal. This isn't about mainstream political parties. It's about people. It's about people. The great thing about this movement for yes is that we're building a movement that's bigger than the vote. We're building a movement that's bigger than the vote. And of course that's true physically. We've got people internationally who are looking at us going, Scotland, show the way, show that there's another model, another way to do things. But it's more than that. Our movement is bigger than the vote, because the referendum is only one day. It's just one day. Our movement is bigger than that vote, because I know when we go to the ballot box and you've got that bit of paper in front of us, it doesn't say no, yes, and radical yes. It's just yes or no. But that's for me when the moment becomes real. That's when it becomes more exciting than it is just now. Because it's us in this room who will vote yes, and then it'll be us in this room that will shape the whole future of an entire nation. And I just want to finish on this, and it's something that Bernadette McAlpine said actually at our last conference. But before that conference, there was an article in the Herald about us, about the Radical Independence campaign, and it said, Radical Independence is the wild card in this referendum, and it said, if we could convince enough young people and working class people to go out and vote yes, then all bets are off. And I think looking at the polls just now, all bets are off. And our slogan was always, another Scotland is possible. But looking at the turnout in this room, the reaction I get when I go out canvassing, and those polls that are coming back, and being fed back into our movement. Another Scotland isn't just possible, it's probable, and I think we should all do that.
Our third speaker and final speaker is, before we open up to the wisdom of the action Afghanistan. Sillars. Jim is a former Labour MP, of course, and former deputy leader of the SNP, and author of a book I'll allude to, In Place of Fear 2. I just want to say one thing, Jim, before he gets here. Jim, you need silts to be head and shoulders above some political guys.
I'm really surprised that anybody's here tonight. Because according to Joanne Lamont, the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland, and I quote her from the STV debate with Nicola Sturgeon on the 25th of February, we are not genetically programmed to make political decisions in Scotland. Put politely, that means we're all thick. It also means that in Joanne's view, we are a unique nation because nobody else has got DNA that makes them programmed not to make political decisions. Quite a unique position for the leader of the Labour Party. Mind you, I'm not surprised, because the other great statement Joanne made was to describe what we are doing with prescription charges, free bus passes for the elderly and everything as the something-for-nothing society. Now, I was interested in what Kat said, that an old man got somewhat excited when Blair was elected in 1997. When I was 8 years old, I remember my father and Mrs. Logan, a miner's wife, dancing up and down the path between our houses because Labour had won in 1945. And 8 years old, that's all I was. I knew something significant had happened in our lives. And of course, it did happen in our lives. Nobody needed to worry about paying for the doctor any longer. And the men who worked on the railway didn't work for private enterprise any longer, and it was the same with the miners. Now, I didn't stand up with glee in 1997 because I had served with Tony Blair in the House of Commons, and if ever there was a lightweight but a brilliant actor, it was him. What I want to do tonight is put our referendum campaign in its historical context. It's very important we do so. Because, Kat, the United Kingdom or the British state is not rich. It is at the end of the English/British Empire, the final stages of decline. All empires face the same. They rise and they fall. Whether it's the Persian Empire, Alexander the Great, the Romans, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, and the English/British Empire, all will go the same way. Have you ever wondered why, on her Jubilee, the Queen sailed up the Thames in a wee boat, with the Duke of Edinburgh dressed as an admiral of the fleet? The reason is that in every other Jubilee, the monarch has reviewed the fleet. But so skint is the British state, there's no fleet to review any longer. an aircraft carrier that they can't put aircraft on. Now, I'm ex-Royal Navy, so I know a thing or two about this. When you put a carrier group to sea, you've got an aircraft carrier surrounded by frigates and destroyers. Some of them are anti-submarine and some of them anti-aircraft, all to protect the aircraft carrier. But if you don't have any planes on the aircraft carrier, it's in trouble. I'll tell you why. Because the anti-aircraft destroyers and frigates only have a certain size of a mast, and the radar up there can't see beyond the horizon. And the missiles that come towards the aircraft carrier come from beyond the horizon. If you have aircraft flying at 20, 30,000 feet, their radar can see beyond the horizon. But if you don't have any aircraft on the aircraft carrier, then you know what happens. That's all an indication of the decline. When I joined the Royal Navy, we had a home fleet, Mediterranean fleet, Far East fleet, and a West Indies station. Now they'll be hard pushed to crew one aircraft carrier. This year the government again will borrow over £100 billion. The UK national debt by round about 2016-17 will be £1.55 trillion. The debt interest they'll be required to pay for that will be more than they'll pay for defence and education put together. It will be around about 75 to 78 billion pounds. That's what you're talking about in a country that's in decline. We will decline along with them. And when they tell us this is the best of both worlds, being in the UK, with more power for our devolved parliament and those broad shoulders of the United Kingdom. What they're offering, at the best, is 40% control of the budget at Holyrood, which also means 60% is controlled elsewhere. And there ain't, as I've explained, no broad shoulders, there's just massive, massive debt. We are lucky. We are a nation and we can escape from that. And this is the opportunity we have on the 18th of September. But Kat and Robin are right. What happens on the 19th of September and every day thereafter is what matters most. It is what we do with our country. Now, my wife calls me a grumpy grandpa. I don't think that's justified. And if she's watching in that web thing there, let me tell her it's definitely not justified. But I am an angry grandpa. I come out of retirement for this campaign because I've got 10 grandchildren. And I've had to tell each of them. I always write to my grandchildren individually when they're leaving primary 7. I write a letter to them, giving them advice. And I've had to tell each of them, if Scotland votes no on the 18th of September, they must get the best qualifications they can in order to get out of our country, because that's the only way they'll have a decent standard of living and prosperity for them and their children and their grandchildren. Because this will remain a low-wage economy for all time coming, with high unemployment, high poverty and dreadful inequality. I don't want to be able to tell my grandchildren that. I want to be able to tell them and everybody else's grandchildren, this is a country in which you can invest your skill and your talent and your time and your energy and build a community we can all be proud of and one that's prosperous. And how we do it was with a different economic model to the one that's failed the British state. We need to do, as Robin was saying, look at the resources of our country. And if you take the resources and you build wealth upon that, you're doing something that's there permanently. The greatest resource we have is in our people and in our children. And so the first priority must be what we do with education. And we don't have, although Mike Russell keeps saying it, it's not true, Mike, we don't have the finest world-class system in education. How can it possibly be when we've got 250,000 children in poverty? How can they possibly have a decent start and opportunity in education? In 1973, in the House of Commons Scottish Grand Committee, we discussed a document called Children Born to Fail. 250,000 Wames in poverty now are born to fail in 2014. We've got to attack that and turn it around. And we can do so without spending a single pound extra. We've got 32 education authorities, 32 bureaucracies, directors of education, in a country of 5 million people. Cut it down to 5 education authorities, and you transfer something like, out of the present budget, £500 million into the schools where it is in fact required. But we can do more. Is everybody in here aware that the independent private schools in Scotland get an 80% reduction in their council tax? Because under the Charities Act, they do some public good. If Fettes in Edinburgh, where Tony Blair was educated privately, has a council tax liability of £209,000, but it only pays £41,000. At the other side of our capital city, in a deprived area called Wester Hales, the Wester Hales School doesn't get the discount. It pays £261,000 in council tax. Now, if we have the audacity that an Ireland Bevan instructed us to have, that means that you must think the way the establishment tells you not to think. You must be able to do what the establishment tells you can't do. Well, I looked up the Charities Act, and the only reason Wester Hales and all the state schools in Scotland don't get that reduction is that they're paid by the minister. Well, with one sweep of the legislative pen, you can remove that inhibition and all our schools get. So without spending one single penny more, we can improve the education in our country and make it world class for the first time for a long time. We're all, I would imagine all, working class in here. Now, I live in middle class Edinburgh. I've got a middle class pension, let me confess. But I'm working class. Always have been, always will be. And there's a lesson the working class has learned, but to some extent has started to ignore. Whether or not we lead a good life depends entirely upon whether we can sell our labour. If we cannot sell our labour, we're in effect and we're subject to the state. We have to ask for benefits. And today, of course, if you miss an appointment at the job centre, you're sanctioned, benefits are withdrawn, and you can become destitute. the key issue for the working class is whether or not we can create an economy into which we can sell our labour. And what determines that is the policy of full employment. I heard on the television today them talking about 5% unemployment, something to be joyous about. That means thousands and thousands of Scottish citizens with no jobs and no hope whatsoever. So the first thing we have to do when we become independent, when we've got the power to do so, is raise the flag that was raised in 1945, the flag of full employment. The Attlee government had no embarrassment about arguing for full employment because that generation knew that fundamental principle. You can sell your labour or you can't sell your labour, and that determines whether or not you have a decent way of life. How do we do that? We start by creating jobs, looking at the resources and looking at the need in our society. We've 157,000 families on the housing waiting list. There's only one way to solve that: build houses. If you don't build houses, they remain in the waiting list. And if you build houses, 25,000, 30,000 a year, somebody's got to quarry the sand, somebody's got to make the cement, somebody's got to make the bricks, somebody's got to transport them to the site, and journeymen and apprentices have got to put them together, and plumbers and slaters and joiners have got to create houses. And you've created work right along that chain. How do we pay for it? Well, one of the ways is to look at one of the gifts that John Major and Gordon Brown left to this society, called the Private Finance Initiative. They're going to take something like 22 billion out of our pockets in the decades ahead. What I argued, I've argued it in the book, is we bring them in and we tell them we want to renegotiate all these PFI contracts. By the way, there is absolutely nothing radical in renegotiating a commercial contract. It's done every day in the week in commerce. If one partner in a contract finds themselves in a different position when the contract was established, then they seek renegotiation. Now these folk will come in and say, no, we don't want it. And it's quite simple. You say, well, there's no problem. We will now pay you 1 year in arrears, and we'll use that money to build houses. But by the way, we're going to tax you at 30% on the PFI contracts, or whether you like it. 18th of September. Then there's the small, already we mentioned, Robin, the number of small, medium-sized enterprises we've got. We've got almost 340,000 small, medium-sized companies in Scotland who get a very bad deal from the banks. We can set up a special bank for them. In fact, it would have been far better doing that than trying to bail out Fred the Shed and RBS. But we can set up a small, medium-sized enterprise bank. One of the cafes I go to, go for a coffee with one of my grandsons. And that lady would like a limited amount of money to expand. Maybe, say, £25,000. She can't get it, no, there's no bonus in that for the banks and all that. I said, yeah, phone them up and ask for 20 million. You'll get an interview. And you'll not get the 20 million. But that's the kind of bank we need for those small, medium-sized companies. Just think about it. If half of them employed one person more at a decent wage, we're a long way towards creating that full employment. Then there's the other resource that we're not supposed to talk about, and that's oil. I am quite convinced that Better Together goes down on its collective knees night after night after night and prays to God that a hole will open up in the North Sea and the oil will gush away. That would really solve the problem of the debate over oil. We have been, as a Scottish nation, in a prison of lies over the oil. I remember Janie Buchan, who was a Labour MEP, great luminary in the Labour Party, on television, saying it can't be Scotland's oil because we didn't put it there. Harry Selby, who was Margot's opponent, said exactly the same thing, only he got it tapped in oil. Now, when I tell my friends in the Arab world that, they fall about laughing. And they say, we didn't put it there either. One of the strange things about oil in the Scottish nation is that we don't know anything about it. We know about shipbuilding, we know about steel making, we know about coal mining, but our knowledge as a nation of the North Sea oil industry is almost zilch. All the arguments have been how much tax revenue we get. Well, there's a blog written by a chap called Stuart Darling, nothing to do with Alistair. And it's worth reading part of this blog. The debate around oil and gas is one of the most peculiar aspects of Scottish life. The UK political parties and media have made sure the Scottish psyche is such that oil and gas might tick along for a while, but the tide won't flow much longer. And thinking anything else is a high-risk strategy. It's going to run out, so don't think about anything else. Inexplicably, the oil and gas sector was not mentioned once as a possible career at any point during my high school education or during my 4 years studying maths and physics at Glasgow University. As the story goes for thousands of Scots, particularly in the Central Belt, home to one of the world's most technologically advanced industries, and yet oblivious to the potential opportunities that this brings directly to them. And he says, last November, I was in the US, and there was an advert on TV about how the oil and gas sector was helping the economic recovery with an overview of the thousands of new jobs being created. Such high-profile promotion of the sector is almost unthinkable in the UK. For some reason, the positive impact of the industry is kept on a need-to-know basis. And that means the Scots need not to know.
Yes.
The other night in Edinburgh at a meeting, somebody to the left of me, to be fair to him, said, you want a Scottish National Oil Corporation. I want to nationalise the whole of the North Sea. I told him we don't have the human capacity to do that. And he said to me, you're right. There are thousands of workers in the North Sea. They'll ken what to do. But of course they don't. Because they go onto a rig, and there's 570 rigs in the North Sea. They go onto a rig, they don't meet other folk in the other rigs, and when they land at Aberdeen, they disperse home. When we had a steel industry in Motherwell, we had the clubs and the pubs and a lot of people together who would talk about their industry and never knew it, the same with mining and shipbuilding. We don't have that in the oil industry. When Thatcher destroyed the British National Oil Corporation, she did so for two reasons. One was she didn't like anything public. The other was that was a window for the nation into what was happening in the North Sea. That window closed and we don't know a great deal about it. Just think of this. We are 5 million people. Oil for 5 million people at 1.4 million barrels a day is more valuable than it is for 60 million people. We can do more with that oil. And I'm thinking not just of the revenues. I want a Scottish National Oil Corporation, as Robin says. We can borrow to buy oil fields in the North Sea. We can demand a share for the Scottish nation for every project. In Denmark, when they issue a licence, they want 20% in the project for the Danish nation. I'm much more moderate than that. I said 15. But the important thing is, we would have not just a share of the tax revenues, but of the wealth from the oil itself. And think what we can do with the black stuff. Let's just take a small portion of the oil as it passes through the refinery at Grangemouth and use it to lower the cost of petrol, diesel and aircraft jet fuel. Think of what that would do. That's a result. It puts more money in the hands of families to spend in the locality. It makes our transport industry the most competitive in Europe. And it makes our tourist industry one of the best going. Because a lot of our tourism comes from the north of England. Man, wife, 2 Waynes in the family car. They hardly go north of the Glasgow-Edinburgh line because of the cost of fuel as you go up into the Highlands. Think what that policy can do to the Scottish tourist industry and the creation of more wealth and more jobs. That's the kind of thing we can do when we're on our own, making our own policies. There's not a snowball's chance in hell of anything like that happening if we remain part of the United Kingdom. Then I just want to say a word on equality. I want, when we are independent in the public sector, everybody working in it and everybody supplying it to get the living wage. And I want, during a 5-year transition period, for the living wage to become mandatory in the private sector as well. I want to go further than that. I want to see a society in which the person at the top in the public sector gets no more than 13 times what the person at the bottom in the public sector gets. Somebody said to me at a meeting, well, are they top folk? They'll go. I said, well, let them. And then I said, where are they going to go? There are plenty of us to fill the jobs if necessary. I am sick and tired of reading someone at the top in the public sector getting a bonus for doing the highly paid job they're supposed to do in the very first place, and the 13-to-1 ratio will bring that to an end. Can I finish by saying this? The reason that I came out of retirement and took part in this campaign is that I see the opportunity for the Scottish working class to finally find its way ahead under its own steam. We are a very talented people, and yet somehow or other we buy the idea that we are inadequate. We are talented people. I want to energise the Scottish working class, to make them understand the latent power that they've had for years and turn that latent power into real power when we are an independent country. There's an old miner in Netherthurd, way back in Cumnock in 1979, who stood up at a meeting I was at, and he said the greatest problem facing the Scottish working class is that all our socialist dreams have been destroyed by the London connection. Well, we can cut that connection, and the Scottish working class can stop dreaming, and we can start turning it into a reality. We can create a better country for our children and our grandchildren. The referendum on the 18th September can be summed up in a short phrase. It is about power. Whether we exercise power or whether power is exercised over us. Between 7 o'clock in the morning and 10 p.m. on the 18th of September, you and me and everybody with a vote in our country is sovereign. We as a nation have sovereign power in our hands. For the first time ever, at 1 minute past 10, have we kept it or have we given it away? And if we've kept it, there will be no more dreaming. There will be reality of a better way of life for all of our people.
Excellent stuff there, all round there. So here's a wee opportunity for everyone here. Those at the back, those are going to sing. So we're going to open up for the question and answer session now. And just one admonition here. Singing from the back. Brian, where's Brian? Brian will have the mic. So when you're going to ask a question or whatever, please ask your question, try and be concise. Because a lot of people here might know a number of points, and the last time we were here was overran a wee bit. And we couldn't get all the question and answer people in. So try and be concise as best as you possibly can, so we give a fair shake to everyone in the hall. And also when you get them, don't ask your question until you get the microphone in front of you. That's to enable the guys on the video tape up there to get it all recorded, so we can use it against it at a later date. Anyway, let me see. Who's going to be first? I'm going to take 2 or 3 speakers at one time, then we'll go through it. If you want to do that way, jump up and catch up. Okay. This gentleman here. This gentleman here. And the guy at the very back, here's the radio.
The consensus of the opinion, which I agree with, is that a yes vote will free up the Labour Party in Scotland to return to its socialist roots. My question is, who's going to lead this new Scottish Socialist Labour Party? The present incumbents, the Labour Party politicians, haven't they got a socialist hair in their heads, and could they run a piss up a brewery? They are career politicians committed to a party and not to an ideal. And for too long, been taking the gravy train to Westminster and Holyrood, doing what they're told to do by the likes of Tony Blair and McAlpine. No socialism there, just a watered-down conservatism. So where are the new leaders of this new Scottish Socialist Labour Party going to come from? Or will it be a better idea to start a new Scottish Socialist Party?
There you go. Microphone over here. Right.
Question directed to
Can
the...
you give us your name, please, if you don't mind it?
My name is Tommy Thomas, I'm from Hamilton. Questions, something that's bothered me for quite a lot of years. Some of you spoke earlier about what you heard many, many years back. We have 432 people own land in Scotland. We take no money from it. Why no? And why is it not been prolongated by anybody in power or anybody wanting to get into power? Surely we could do something with that. The land tax that would come for that. That's my question.
Right, back next to the radio. I think you next. No, not you, mate. Guy behind you. Give us your name, please, if you don't mind.
Sorry?
Give us your name, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry, John McCauley, I'm a member of the Social Workers Party. It's made a wee statement. The likes of your Amazons are getting the likes of £300 million to set up businesses or set up within Scotland. You know, they've opened that place up in Fife. They're also getting subsidised with tax credits. People think the tax credits is there for them. It's not. It's there to subsidise these big businesses. It's to subsidise the Asda's, the Tesco's and the Amazons. And the thing is, tomorrow, I don't know whether anybody's aware of this or not, there starts the community work programme. It sounds a nice wee name, where people are going to be forced to work for 6 months for free, gratis. They won't get their benefit if they don't do it. 6 months is a long time. What do you think about that?
Thank you.
I'll do them quickly in reverse order. You're absolutely right, tax credits are a subsidy to low-pay employers, and I'm completely with Jim, except I wouldn't wait 5 years for the living wage. We've got a paper on this one as well. I'm going to keep saying this, I'm sorry, but the papers and everything. Our social security paper, it's not welfare, it's about creating social security again. Let's take the language back. Our social security paper, quickly, a basic calculation, if all employers in Scotland were paying a living wage, it would save £250 million a year in tax credits. Now we recognise that some of the small businesses and some of the marginal businesses would struggle at first, but we can comfortably subsidise the international insurance reductions or other models. We can move to living wage straight away, and we absolutely got to, because it's absolutely right. We've got a welfare system, social security system in this country, which is designed to use anxiety and fear to force people into low pay. It's part of the structure of the low pay economy. We have a welfare system which is about compelling people into low pay to take jobs they wouldn't otherwise take because they're rubbish. We have to reverse this completely. Again, if you look and see a Nordic country or what we did in postmodern Britain, what we were doing was creating a social security system that was about security. Give people a foundation and then let them build a life for that. So you give them a solid foundation, then they go and look for good work, not give them a shaky foundation and force them into any shit that comes along. So that's the first thing, you're absolutely right. We've just got to shift that system straight away. I haven't got time to go into the rest of the welfare paper, but have a look at it. On land, we live in a country which is on the borders of the biggest desert in Europe. The north of Scotland's dead. It used to be a thriving, lively community, populated, farmed, lived in, used, worked. There's this massive amount of land up there. What happened was the landowners stopped using it economically because it was more valuable to trade it speculatively. So in the last 5 years, 5 or 10 years, if you had money, you'd have been better buying an estate in the north of Scotland than shares, because the price of land rose 5 times faster than the stock market. And that's why David Cameron's father-in-law owns 400,000 acres of our land. And Paul Dacre, the editor of the Daily Mail, he owns 40,000 acres of our land. And the one thing they cannot do with that land is make it productive. Because if they started making it productive, they'd suddenly realise that the land wasn't worth what they paid for it. So they've got to keep it unproductive. A land value tax, we've got a paper coming out in this soon, is absolutely crucial. Scotland needs to develop land-based industries again, and we'll never do that unless ordinary people have a fighting chance of owning land. You've got no chance of owning land in this country. You want to build a land-based industry, fundamental part of our industrial policy, both for generating income but also to bring the value of land back down to its economic use value. And then what we do, we can have large-scale biomass, we can have all sorts of local farmers, all sorts of things we can do. It's crucial that we take our land back. And on labour and leadership, I'm going to say one thing which gets me booed at these meetings, but I mean it. I'm as annoyed at a lot of what's been coming out of Better Together people as anybody else. But we are going to have to find a way to pull this country back together again afterwards. Now, there are people in the Labour movement whose behaviour has not been what I would want it to be, but see, once we're through this, we're going to have to find the Mandela Gandhi side of ourselves to say, there we are now, and what was done was wrong, but this is a fresh start in Scotland, we need to build. Now, there's no time to talk about this, the whole load of ways that we can make the Commonweal, the Socialist Scotland happen, so we can try and win the SNP, because I reckon 2/3 of the SNP are comfortably Commonweal, I've been doing a lot of meetings. Or we could try and win Labour, because I think about half of them are probably Commonweal. Or we could try and build the Greens up. Or we could try and build cross-party consensus across the different parties, or individual consensus. Or we could start a new political party, although I would warn you, as a political strategist, 18 months is a short time to establish a winning political party. What we have to do is, as soon as this is over, all of us, that, I mean, literally, this is amazing in here tonight, the hundreds of people that I'm seeing night after night at meetings, they've got to get back into politics. We've got to reclaim party politics for ourselves. Pick a party, get into it, and turn it into what you want it to be. It might be Labour and it might well not be, but whatever happens, from the time, from the 19th of September, my entire life and the work of the Reid Foundation is going to be all predicated in making sure that this country goes into an election in 2016 where it's got at least one party that could be a government that stands in a Commonweal manifesto. How that will happen is too early to say, but that's the goal. We must have a party that comes out and puts on a table a Scotland that we want, because if they do, they'll win.
I think the Labour Party question is really important. I think that is something that's really interesting and quite important to the debate. I mean, I think that after the referendum, I mean, in the event of a yes vote, we will be challenging 3 centuries of union. That is an explosion in the world of politics. And I don't know what's going to happen to Scottish Labour in that moment, because I'll tell you what, I know a hell of a lot of Labour Party members who are voting yes. I know a hell of a lot of them. And I think that there is going to be some space that opens up there, and whether they do form into something new, it will definitely be interesting. I think part of the problem that has plagued politics, and particularly left-wing politics for a long time, is the scandal of funding and the way that parties have funding, and that's what creates that culture of careerism, that people go into it because they see it as a career move and not because they want to represent the interests of their class or their communities. And I think that we need to start looking at ways that we can actually change that. And one of the ideas we've been talking about in the Radical Independence campaign is this thing called the democracy card. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this before. It's an idea that started in the United States. Basically what happens, well, United States, you know, their political system and how their parties are funded is incredible, do you know what I mean? Watching it like a bloody circus. Each citizen would get a credit card called the democracy card. And on that card there would be £50. This is our proposal. Be £50 on that. And you can give that card, the money on that card, to any political party that you want. But once the party's accepted it, they can't accept funding from any other source apart from more democracy cards. So they can't have it from big business, they can't have it from private interest groups, they can't have it from people looking for a wee bit of a, you know, can you do me a favour here? And I think that's never going to happen under the Westminster system. You know, the parties there are going to continue to be careerist and filled with careerists, but we've got a wee idea that is a way for us to hold our elected officials to account. And I think that would have been great for the Labour Party in Scotland if they could be held to account. I know plenty of people who've been involved in the Labour Party who are disgusted at the Scottish Labour leader saying that we have a something for nothing culture. It's abhorrent. The other question that you asked, I think it was yourself up the back, about the community work programme. The attacks on the welfare state are actually, I mean, it's causing people to lose their lives. If you look at what's happened with ATOS, the work capability assessments, things like that. I mean, I think an independent Scotland could be in a position to have a properly funded social security system. And the one thing that we need to remember, and it's something I always try and keep in my mind when I'm out canvassing or talking to people, is that we're fed this line all the time that somehow people on benefits or people that use the social security system are somehow draining the country. And I looked into this, and it's about social benefits that are wrongly claimed, fraudulently or incorrectly, cost the economy about £1 billion. But see, tax avoidance and tax evasion by the super rich, that costs £70 billion. And that's the way our society is structured, because it's actually the super rich that are avoiding tax that we can't afford, not people on low pay or looking for work. And I think that we've got to have some sort of way of changing that. I think that the proposals that the Commonweal has around welfare, about not using social security to top up low wages, but rather to increase the wage rates, to have a living wage for our citizens, is a far better way forward.
Let's take the Labour Party first. Scottish politics are going to be turned upside down on the 19th. One of the reasons is that there's people like Cat who are campaigning and learning about politics day after day in this campaign. This is the greatest grassroots movement Scotland has ever seen. As I go around, I'm saying to those, well, the young people compared to me, I'm saying to them, you mustn't go home on the 19th. No, you've learned a great deal, you've been inducted into your political process, you've realised that you've got a lot of talent and a lot of ability, now you start participating in the political process. And nobody knows what the dynamic will be when those people stop campaigning for a yes vote and start campaigning for a better country and policies. I am very, very optimistic about the position of what I call the broad Labour socialist movement after the 18th of September, because it's the left that's going to win this campaign, and you cannot expect that left then to go home, close its mind off. It's not going to happen. Things are going to really change. Now, whether it changes with a Labour Party, I don't know. There is an Independence for Labour campaign, and I've met them and talked to the chap who's leading them, Alan Cogan, and he said he's got two objectives, him and his group. One's to get a yes vote, and the other's to change the Labour Party after immediately getting a yes vote. And I think that's perfectly possible. I rather like the idea that Kat's talking about the citizen determining how much money will go to a political party. You can do it in your income tax return, no bother. You can be a wee bit there that says £20, £50, and which party you want it to, and she's quite right. Nobody else contributes outside the citizen, and that keeps it absolutely fair. On land, very interesting. There are places in Norway on the same latitude as parts of the Highlands, and they're not desolate at all. They've got thriving communities because the pattern of land ownership is entirely different. Now, the land question has been at the forefront of the socialist movement in Scotland since Adam was a boy. We have no chance of doing anything about it until we get a socialist government in Edinburgh. But once we get a socialist government in Edinburgh, then we can start to tackle the land ownership issue. You know that the Duke of Buccleuch doesn't own the Buccleuch estates. It's done through all sorts of complicated ways. The Queen doesn't own Balmoral either, incidentally. That's done through trustees and all. You strip that out so that we actually know who the beneficiaries are of those who claim to be the landowners, and then we start to... And one of the things we can start to sort it out is the land value tax. Right now there are millions of acres of land where nobody pays a penny towards the local community. We can start with that, with a land value tax. As far as tax credits go, I can never get my head round that tax credits were a subsidy to the worker. They're a subsidy to the employer, and as long as there's tax credits, we will have a low-wage economy, because there is no incentive whatsoever on an employer to invest and go up the value chain and pay higher wages while they can get the state, in fact, to pay. As far as the work programme is concerned, this is folk who are subjects of the state, because we don't have full employment, and that means that the working class person is not in a bargaining position. If you have full employment, then the bargaining strength lies with the ordinary worker. Because then the employers and everybody else has to pay you, because there's not another 10 folk or 40 folk or 50 folk willing to do the job. Right now, you can be told if you don't like it, there are plenty of other people doing so. Can I say one word further on benefits? On the television debate with George Galloway, I was asked by one of the interviewers, it was put to me, that my claim of Scottish values as different from south of the border was false. Because on the question of benefit cuts, the opinion polls north and south of the border didn't show much of a difference. Well, if that's the case, we've got to rake our conscience on that. Of course we've got chancers in the benefit system. We've always had chancers in the benefit system. But they're a tiny, tiny minority. The vast people who rely on benefits, whether they're unemployed or whether they're disabled, are decent people who are victims of the way we organise our society at the present time. And no hesitation on that television and saying the Scottish nation has to rake its conscience. Has the milk of human kindness that we boast about that flowed through the veins of the Scottish body politic, has it turned sour? I don't believe it has, but I think you've got to take head on when somebody says cut benefits, to tell them what you're doing is making people destitute and punishing children. Now face up to that.
In the floor here.
Right, let's leave it for
Alice Carter. I've got 2 points. One quite brief question. What's your opinion on staying in the European Union? Because I gather the thinking at the moment is that we stay in, no referendum, nothing, we're all going to be part of the European Union. Second one, they're talking about tax credits and how employers should be relying on them. I tell you, an awful lot of people claiming they were actually single mothers working 16, 18 hours a week, and that's what they choose to do, so they can work and have time with their kids, and they claim tax credits. Can you really expect an employer to pay someone like that a full-time wage? I think you're probably going to have some kind of system to allow them to carry on as they are, because they don't want to work full-time, they don't want to put their kids into nursery for 10 hours a day. They like the system as it is. Part-time, a subsidy, and time with their kids.
right, let's shut it right here.
Thank you. My name is Jim Bain. I think one of the problems so far in the campaign is how the media and politicians present the issue. You're either for the SNP or you're for Labour. As a socialist, regular self-socialist worker, I think there's a radical socialist case for independence, and I think that's been outlined tonight. You can be against Trident, against austerity, and against the Tory officer wanting to privatise the health service. But a couple of questions I want to ask. Jim talked about the latent power of the working class. We've seen it recently in the last 12 months in the anti-bedroom tax campaign, which won a very, very important victory against the bedroom tax, and it's really energised communities, particularly in this area where the North Lanarkshire Council were exposed rather badly. So the question I've got, I suppose, is twofold. One is, how do we take that energy we saw in that campaign? How do we sort of bring it into the independence campaign? How do we get the two forces together? And I suppose what's part of that is, how do we get the many, many Labour voters who are so far undecided or maybe thinking of voting no, how do we get them to come over to yes position?
Brian, down here.
Andrew Galloway. I'm forever hearing, and none more saw that right when you were talking to George Galloway. He was of the opinion that a no vote is in essence of us deserting the fellow workers in Ipswich, Manchester, for instance. He then went on to say he had more in common with a working man from England than he does with a rich Scottish landowner. But surely if the good people of England want to vote Tory, then that's their democratic right. And we can be a beacon of hope for our brothers in the rump UK to follow suit. There is a massive democratic deficit regarding things. I mean, the Scottish MPs voted against the bedroom tax, got it imposed and such, but vote no, as you say, we don't want to be living in a socialist Scotland. There's also a centre-right people who I'm speaking to. How do I convince these people of the centre-right on the political spectrum for a yes vote?
I don't know how to address the centre-right factor, because for me the referendum is about the possibility and the probability and the certainty of liberating the Scottish working class. I mean, that's what I'm about. I don't deny the legitimacy of the ideas of the centre-right. And, you know, I oppose them, I don't agree with them, but I accept that that's a legitimate point of view in a democracy. Fine, and they will have their position in Scottish society. I don't claim that everybody on the left has all the answers to everything, and I've found as I've gone through life, it's worthwhile listening to the other side as well, because you can always learn a thing or two. But I make no appeal whatsoever to the centre-right, and I'd be telling a lie if I did. On the question of our fellow workers, you know, Scotland once had 50 Labour MPs, while Margaret Thatcher was destroying our manufacturing base. We have, time after time, done our bit in the argument about workers united north and south of the border politically. And we've got nothing in return since the 1945 government, basically. I mean, I put it this way. Suppose two folk are standing on the Titanic as it's going down. One can jump and get saved, and for a whole variety of reasons, the other one can't jump. And the one that can't jump says to the one that can jump, I don't want you to jump, I want you to drown along with me. Well, I would jump. On the question of things like the bedroom tax and the poll tax, I'll tell you something. I am fed up us having to engage our energies in fighting policies that we don't like and having to fight them, to defeat them. How much better when we're independent, when we don't need to do that, when we can use all our energies to actually build policies that we like and nobody imposes upon us. That's for me one of the essence of the reason for voting for independence. One of the problems we have, and I think it has to be addressed, the Labour voter who's still undecided is probably undecided because they don't like Alex Salmond and the SNP. And you'll notice that the Better Together No side concentrate massively on Alex Salmond and the SNP. George Galloway never debated independence with me. George Galloway belaboured Alex Salmond, the SNP, and their white paper. I debated with Neil Finlay, who was a Labour MSP in Kilmarnock, and he was exactly the same. And I said, but one day you're going to argue about independence. No. It was Alex Salmond. It was a trade union meeting, and he was appealing to their basic anti-SNP attitude. And we have to get over to people. This is not about Alex. This is a national question. This is about the future of our grandchildren and their grandchildren and what we do with our society. As I put it, Alex is mortal, but the nation's immortal. And there's, I mean, well, I don't know what the day that one's born if Alex Salmon get knocked out with that proverbial bus. That's not an idea that I could get expelled for the SNP. But that's we have to get that across. This is about something much, much bigger than any individual and any political party. Now, if we can get that across, once you get that out of the way, then you can start talking to Labour voters about the kind of society that we actually want to create. Now, I don't agree with the lady when she says that a part-time worker should get a different wage from a full-time worker. If I put in 1 hour of work, I'm entitled to the same wage as somebody else putting in 1 hour of work. That's not an argument that I would accept. On the European Union, actually I would prefer us to be in the European Free Trade Association. The only thing that matters to an independent Scotland, the only thing that matters to us is access to that European market, which includes England, Wales and Northern Ireland. That's the only thing that matters. And if you're a member of the European Free Trade Association, you have automatic entry, because there's been a treaty between EFTA and the EU since 1994, and it's created the European Economic Area. Sometimes as you go through passport control, coming back from a foreign holiday, you'll see EEA. Well, that's the European Economic Area between EFTA and the EU, where there is in fact no barriers to trade whatsoever. But that would free us from lots of other things in the EU. We would not be totally controlled by the European Union. We would not be dragged into a potential conflict with Ukraine at the present time. We would be able to control our own fisheries. We would be able to control our own foreign policy, and we'd be able to control our own foreign trade policy to the rest of the world. Norway has been talking to India about a free trade agreement. Now, for a big country like India, Norway presents no problem for a free trade agreement because there's no vested interest there. But for an EU-India free trade agreement, that's much more difficult because there's vested interest somewhere in the 28 countries in the EU. So we would be far better off in terms of the sovereignty that we could exercise if we were in the European Free Trade Association. But let me say this. I don't believe for a moment that we'll be kicked out of the European Union. I think it's absurd for anybody to believe that. First of all, they claim that we are citizens. They tell us we're citizens. Secondly, they go around the world preaching democracy. Change peacefully by the ballot box in a democratic method. Well, we're peaceful. Nobody's going to stop us going to the ballot box and all the rest. Just think of their international reputation. If we vote yes democratically and peacefully by the ballot box, and they tell the rest of the world, well, what we've been telling you actually doesn't apply to citizens in our country. Now, they might then say that they'll have an argument about the terms in which we stay in. That might be a much more difficult position, but the oil factor is not unimportant. We are the only major oil producer in the EU, and that's a bargaining chip that we can use.
Thanks. Sorry, I don't want to speak for too long. I want the chance for people to ask as many questions as possible and make as many contributions. I do worry about the idea that this has become, as I said, a debate between Labour and the SNP, because it can't be about that. At the end of the day, it can't be about Labour's failed and, oh, I don't like Alex Salmond, because what's in the white paper is actually really interesting. I think there's some good proposals in it. I don't think it's perfect, but it's not what the debate's about. It's about much more than that. I was speaking to Jim earlier, and he was saying that there's about 250 different groups across Scotland that have sprung up outside of the official Yes campaign, who are campaigning for independence. Like 250 normal grassroots activists going out, chapping doors, making the arguments. So that's, I think, the way to win round the Labour voters, is to say, well, it's not a debate about mainstream parties, it's not a debate just between Labour and the SNP, there's much more going on here. On Europe as well, I mean, I think there is a problem with democracy in the European Union. Like, I do think there are problems with it. I've been to Athens, to Greece, to speak to trade unionists there, and some of the austerity measures that people in Greece are suffering are brutal, really, really brutal. So I do think there's a problem with democracy in the European Union. But I'm the same as Jim. I don't think we'll be kicked out. I think there might be arguments about how we're going to stay, and I think that we can shape the terms on which we are in the European Union. I think we can actually shape those terms. It's not the first time it would have happened. When the French were negotiating their constitution within Europe, they renegotiated it because they weren't happy with it, and it was the socialist parties and the broad left that made sure that the renegotiation happened and that they softened the constitutional arrangement. So it is possible for that to happen. On your point, the man down here, about the debate between George Galloway, I mean, some of the arguments that come from Galloway on this, I just find really, really irritating. Really, really like I was saying, I'm involved in the trade union movement, and what brings us together, like, as a class, is our shared interests, our shared history, our shared identity. It's not what country we live in. That's not what defines us, and I don't have any less solidarity or any less support for someone striking in Greece or in France than I do someone in England for independence. It's not how it works. And then a couple of years ago, there was a European general strike. Workers can show solidarity across borders, of course they can. Part of the problem for me is that the very laws which are criminalising solidarity, the anti-trade union laws, they have never been repealed. Even when Labour was in power, they were never repealed. Tony Blair celebrated the fact that we had very, very restrictive labour laws. And you know, that's another opportunity in an independent Scotland, is that we demand the repealing of those anti-democracy laws, because that's at the heart really what they are. And at the end of the day, borders aren't drawn on these islands between like Glasgow and Birmingham. That's not where the borders are drawn. Borders are drawn between ordinary citizens and the super rich in the City of London. That's where the borders are drawn. They're drawn on class lines, not on national lines, and that's what people like Galloway keep forgetting.
And also super quick, first of all, in the part-time working, again, I haven't got time to explain it all, but I'd encourage you to go and look at our paper on social security. We're proposing a citizen's income, which means that, because I'm assuming what you're saying is people should be able to take fewer hours, not more pay per hour, because they've got other caring responsibilities. We've got to find a way to resolve that, and citizen's income is the way to do it. If you have a citizen's income which everybody gets a small payment sufficient to live out of their, you know, no matter what their position is, and then after that, employment's all top-up pay on top of that for everybody. It works very well. You need to go and have a look at it. There's nothing to talk about it. The EU, I'll say slightly in defence, the current issue of the Scottish Left Reviews online, and it's fascinating, there's been a big debate about this. My view is that the EU right now is almost exactly equally a device that prevents a race to the bottom on social protection, which makes it socially democratic, and at the same time it prevents a race to the top on trade issues, which makes it neoliberal. And it's almost perfectly on the border. So yes, it stops countries chasing each other to the bottom and longer working hours and poorer regulation, and that's a good thing. But then we've got the trade deals, which is a bad thing. Now, in my view, at the moment, the EU is just marginally better than worse. If they pass the TTIP rules, that would tip the balance another way for me. And again, it's difficult to go into this all just now, but at the moment, I just think the EU is slightly more beneficial than bad, but it is a bit borderline for me. Okay, what do we do with Labour voters? I've never been a fan of parties. I tried them, it didn't really fit me. Why don't you think everything they think? I'm a big fan of ideas. So how do we get a Labour voter to come over? Let's stop them talking about Alexander and let's start them talking about ideas. And what we're going to try and do is produce what is, to all intents and purposes, a manifesto for a better Scotland, which is not coming from any political party, but it's coming from a whole host of social thinkers. We're going to try and put that on the table in early May, take that to some Labour voters and say, you don't have to like any one party, look at what Scotland could be. So I hope that helps. The working class energy and the power thing, I'm going to say something which is a little complicated here. It's also about the centre-right, which is, if you look at what has actually, one of the things which I am going to say here is, the left is quite good at rhetoric about workers' power and fight and struggle. The reality is, when we have the workers struggling on their own, they lose. Where the workers have benefited, where working people have benefited throughout the 20th century, throughout the period of democratic era, is when we manage to make their interests the same as the interests of other people, so that these institutions are supported. So you look at the single thing that's probably done more to help working people in this country is the NHS. And the reason it's so strong is because it's collective. Everybody from centre-right to centre-left, from wealthy to not wealthy, has a vested interest in making it work. Now that's why we used it very, very carefully, used the phrase, all of us first. What our strategy is, what we're trying to do, is to say the more that we can make everybody's interests come together and things which work for everybody, the people who benefit the most are the poor. That's why universal public services are so important. Everybody benefits, but the poor benefit by far the most, and it makes them stronger and more stable. So what we're trying to say is small businesses have been screwed over by the UK economic system almost as much as many of the poor and many of the workers in this country. So if we can see that an economy which benefits small businesses to create good jobs and creates good jobs for workers and enables strong public services, we can tie these interests together. And I've talked to centre-right groups, and they don't agree with everything, but they'll talk about a lot of common where we say, actually, yeah, why is it that a small business pays a higher rate of tax than a corporation because a corporation doesn't pay any tax? So if we're talking about independent business, they have a lot of the interest. We can bring people together. The politics of division, which I hate more than anything, the politics of division, which is the politics of the UK, the people who always lose are the poor. And that's why we're trying to in this policy stuff to keep people together. But on the solidarity point, and we've got to be able to tell the difference between a solidarity and a suicide pact. Staying with England doesn't help the poor in England. Certainly damages the poor in this country. It's a suicide pact to stay. It's not solidarity. And I'll tell you a really interesting thing. By far the coolest thing about this campaign for me is they've invited me to go and play Glastonbury. Now, I know that sounds surprising. Billy Bragg is curating the left field tent at Glastonbury, which is the politics tent. I am in touch with so many lefties in London, from the academic front, from the policy front, from the activist front. They phone quite often and say, what's going on in Scotland, what's going on in Scotland? None of them want us to stay. The people who keep saying, oh, stay and look after the workers in England, don't seem to be the people who are actually out campaigning for the workers in England. What they're telling us, the people who are actually out campaigning for working people in England, what they're telling us, run Scotland, run and bring help. That is not the same as what I'm hearing from the Labour Party and others who say, oh no, you better stay and suffer it a little bit, because somehow in a way that I can't quite explain, it's going to help the poor. It won't.
But we're going to have three speakers, and we take one forward, one here, and one over here. And I want the balance. There's a wee bit of imbalance here in relation to women, gender, very well. This lady here, somebody from over here, with a hand up over there wanting to speak. The gentleman with a white t-shirt over there, and somebody over here. Well, What up there, Tom? That gentleman at the very back over there. All the three. If you're good, quick and concise, you might sneak another couple in. That's his indulgent harmony. Anyway. Sorry.
Right. My name's Sharon Anderson. I'm a mum and a grandmum and a race campaigner and Motherwell wisher. I want to start with a quote. We are entitled to live in a society that is different from the one where so many are mired in poverty. If boldness is required, If boldness is required to give us priority, well, I'm being bold, that's what Jim Sillars about. The missing million and the boys that are going to fail, well, that's our families, welcome to Motherwell. But here's the thing, our kids are not looking back anymore, they're looking forward. They don't want to know why we need to do it, why we need to get independence. They want to know how to get into these jobs like the oil industry and the energy industries that we're hearing so much about. So can any of the panel members get us information that we need to get our kids ready to create our own workforce? Some of our kids are still at high school. We can utilise what's already in place. We're not going to let this opportunity pass us by for another generation. With your wealth of knowledge and the kids' determination, we can start to take control of our own futures. Well, now we're back.
The discussion thus far has vastly been about the social and economic state in this country, and rightly so. Obviously we must escape the clutches of the banks, the corporations and the puppet politicians and their control. However, my question is on drug reform in this country and what the panel thinks, what potential there is for that, considering that prohibition at the minute hasn't worked. There are many people in this country who are addicted to drugs and taking them, and that puts all the wealth of drugs in the hands of criminals. What potential is there for progressive ideas such as those in Uruguay, Colorado, Washington, etc.? Thank you.
Hello, Frank Conley here. I'm asking what the Labour Party or what the Labour MPs have done in Lanarkshire for the last 30 years. The old socialists like Jimmy Dempsey and John Smith must be turning their grave when we see as being represented in our constituency with Pamela Nash, and you've got Frankie Roy who sat here a few months ago and basically treated the audience with contempt with some of his answers. I also look at a European question. And the Spanish can't lecture us about anything. When I went to Spain in the early 70s, it was a fascist country run by Franco, and it joined the European Union after us. And if they do take away European membership from Scotland, they must remember this, that they needed our fishing rights over the last 20, 30 years. And then they can answer when we put a 200-mile exclusion zone in the Spanish trawlers, and therefore they can't fish in our waters. And it's funny how East Germany was admitted in the European Union when they unified the West Germany in 1990 without any questions being asked. Thank you.
I'm going to be really fast so that we can get more questions in. Yourself, sir, the point about drug reform. At the end of that contribution, I think you almost answered the question yourself. You said, what is the potential for progressive ideas in an independent Scotland? And I think on this panel, we're all talking about progressive ideas. Like I said, Radical Independence isn't a political party, but I'm sure the majority of people in that would agree that people should never, ever be criminalised for an addiction. People should never be criminalised for that addiction. On the question about education and young people, I think look to the Finnish model in Finland. They've got much better rates of social mobility, of social participation, of youth employment, of having a skilled workforce. And I'll tell you what they did. They abolished private education. They banned private schools. That's how they did it. We've got some of the worst rates of working class kids going to university. We've got hardly any apprenticeships, no skilled apprenticeships, no productive industries to put people into, and I think that balancing out the education system at the very start at the very start of it is really, really important. Because what happens when you've got an education system that says you can get a better deal if you've got more money? What does that do to people from a very early age? And I think we should, and maybe that is a radical proposal, but I say ban private schools.
The first thing that I'd say to your Waynes is I can't lie to you. There's nothing that I can tell them that would get them in good jobs that don't exist. That's the problem. I told you, 1 in 5 jobs in this country pays between £25,000 and £35,000, and we know who monopolises those jobs. There's only one thing that we can do is create more industries, and fast. Now the key thing here is, one thing I do want to say is, this isn't a generational thing. Clever politicians, which is local politicians, clever politicians stroke their chin, and always talk about why things take time. All I'm going to say is, Attlee created the welfare state, the NHS, a massive house building programme, and nationalised large chunks of the industry in 5 years. Thatcher undid it all in 5 years. Politicians or political parties or nations with the will to do things can turn it around fast. We're going to put out a paper soon on 21 industry sectors that Scotland could develop, and some of them could be day 2 of independence. We can get house building, not the old house building, modern, high-tech house building like the Germans do. We can get that started on day 1. We can get energy technology installation on day 2, and then we can start doing things like saying, what about biomass, what about land-based industries, what about a whole host of manufacturing and building industries that we could do fast. That's the only way that I could look at, away from a work-class background in the eye and say, I can see a decent future for you, is the truth. I'm just going to say one thing, just imagine this: drugs, prison reform, immigration, the whole squad. Just imagine what it would be like when we don't have the Daily Mail. Politicians are all scared of common sense if the Daily Mail decides there's no common sense. I don't even know if they'll keep publishing, but certainly make sure they don't have the same market share. And then we can have a real serious shot at addressing the drugs thing. You picked the right point, is the profitability. Take the profit out of it. That's the problem. We've got to de-profitise the illegal drug industry in this country. Who are these MPs in the Labour Party? Well, who knows? Where did they come from? But the same is true of the SNP. Politics has become a closed game. You become a politician by working for a politician. That's how politics works now. We are the most there's so much I'm not going to talk about tonight because there's so much going on. We are the most centralised country in the developed world, below the least democratic country in the world, below national level. We've got a local authority in this country that's the size of Belgium. How the hell is that local? I live in Lanarkshire. I'm 35 miles to my local authority, and folk in Hamilton send folk out to knock schools down in Mattoon, which nobody in Mattoon wants to knock down. We don't know who the hell they are. They want to put car parks in places they've never seen. There's no local democracy, but it's another crucial problem. In France, in every election, 1 in 78 members of the public stands for election. In Scotland, it's 1 in 2,000. Politics is a thing that's done by people you don't know in places you don't see. Every other country's got decent local democracy, and that offers a platform because, one, it helps women get into politics, because the current model doesn't help women get in. Without local politics, women find it much harder to get into politics. And even more so, working class people find it hard to get into politics. We hear a lot about there's no women in politics, and that's true. There are no working class people coming through and getting into politics. So we have to create a political system which enables people to start locally and build up the knowledge and the skills to become national politicians. And as for Spain, we'll be out of the EU. I mean, if rules had anything to do with anything, Germany and France would have been thrown out of the EU years ago for breaking the deficit pact, and America would have been thrown out of the World Trade Organization for subsidising its internal farming market. The world doesn't work in rules, the world works in realpolitik. We will be outside the EU for as long as Spain can afford its fragile fishing industry not to have access to our waters. It will be out of the EU for as long as we can afford to put every single EU citizen in this country on EasyJet and send them back to their countries where they won't have jobs which they've got here. The Spanish are all here working. There's 40,000 Spaniards in Edinburgh. That won't happen. As soon as they don't need the entire northwestern territorial waters of the European Union in European Union control, we'll just say, we'll make a pact with Russia. How do you feel about that? They can help us control your northern borders. That's what we have. And if that doesn't work, I say, let's offer Spain our 9% of Gibraltar back.
forgot to actually say something, and it was on the drugs question again. So when you think about the amount of social problems that are caused by alcohol, and that's not criminalised, it's because it's profitable. And I think that that's actually right at the core of the drugs question, is about the profitability of the industry and the constant criminalisation of the working class. That's really what it's about. Because if you think about all the times there's been a scandal about a Tory minister and some drugs, and it's all been a bit like, oh well, you know, they get away with it. But when it's ordinary people that it happens to, it's a massive criminal issue. And I think that question, that's what I wanted to come back in, actually highlights a lot of the class division that we have in this country. And I just wanted, sorry I rushed through my first contribution, I just wanted to come in and say that.
As long as there is prohibition on the Class A drugs, we'll have criminality. It's as simple as that. It was no different in the United States when prohibition was on alcoholism. But there's another layer of drugs which is an extremely difficult one to deal with, and that's the legal highs, which I'm told by chemists, you know, if you buy one lot, they can manufacture another lot the next day. It will be very difficult producing legislation that deals with that particular issue. But
the reason people take legal highs is because the existing drugs what people want to take.
Pardon?
The reason that people take legal highs is because the existing drugs that people would rather take are criminalised and they don't want to.
I understand that. And so that, you know, the root cause is the prohibition. It will take a great deal of moral courage on the part of politicians to deal with that, let me tell you. And I don't think the present people who are MPs and MSPs would have the necessary moral courage to do so. I must tell you that being the case. As far as offering something to our young people, there can be no jobs without jobs, real jobs. And for real jobs you need projects. You need things. There's a lot of work required to be done in our country. I live in Edinburgh, and you pass by some of these very, very nice, you know, tenements. But you see when you enter the closes, they're in a terrible state. And if you actually think about it, the number of jobs potential that would be created by just simply solving that wee problem of bad closes. There is a lot of stonework in the whole of Scotland, which requires stonemason skills to tackle. And so therefore we can create work, because work, we don't create the work, we can create the people to do the work because the work is there crying out to be done. That's something that we actually have to grasp. Labour MPs, you know, the best job in the United Kingdom is being a Scottish Labour MP. Because outside of their own constituencies, nobody kens them and nobody kens what they're doing. A very great deal of the work that would normally be associated with a Westminster MP is actually done by the MSPs at Holyrood. And they don't get any coverage in the press, which means that you actually don't get any spotlight on them in the press either. Not necessarily their fault that they don't get coverage, but that is in fact, you know, a fact of life. As far as the EU is concerned, if the EU want us to remain in, they will find a way of keeping us in. If you look at the history of the European Union, there was a thing called the Luxembourg Accord, which young people in here will never have heard of. When the European, or what was called the common market, was established, it was on the basis that everybody had to agree with every policy. The French didn't like the policy, so they had the policy of the empty chair. So you took a vote, they weren't there, you couldn't get unanimity. And what they then did, they met in Luxembourg and said, look, we'll agree. If there's something that somebody doesn't really like, it'll no pass. And that was the Luxembourg Accord. You've even had devices, for example, where treaty obligations have required an answer by midnight on a certain day, and what they did was they said, no, we'll stop the clock. It's only 1 minute to midnight until we solve this, even if it takes us 3 months. So they're perfectly capable of being flexible when they're presented with a very difficult problem. So I say I don't have any anxiety about that whatsoever. But again, once again, I tell you, I'd far rather be in the European Free Trade Association along with Norway and Switzerland and Iceland and Liechtenstein. And by the way, when you hear the stuff about Iceland having been a basket case, Iceland's recovered faster than the United Kingdom, and it's going to get on the way.
Well, I'm really pushing against time, and as a trade unionist, I don't want to keep people working late any of the night. Committee for something else, don't mean yourself, I mean staff and so on. And we've been going for a good time. But I just want to give all the panellists an opportunity, maybe stay on for a couple of minutes each, on a kind of line and winding up position as to where we think we should be before we come to some very, very important announcements. So take 5 minutes. Because we're involved in a campaign here. Biggest campaign we set up here tonight. First time ever. And given a vote on the 18th September to decide the future of our country. So I'm going to ask you, okay, sorry about that, have to get everybody in. Can I do it this time? Maybe do it next time. Maybe do it in alphabetical order and we'll start. But anyway, I'm going to get Kat to go first. A couple of minutes. Kat. Save yourself, Robin. Save yourself. Okay.
I just want to finish by re-emphasising the point that we're not going to have a massive majority. We just need to tip it over the edge. So go out from this meeting and speak to as many people as possible and take the arguments that Robin and Jim have given tonight and give them to other people, because really, naturally, and when the debate is had, yes always wins. When I've been setting up local meetings, local independence meetings, I always try and make it a debate, always. It's dead hard to get someone from the no side to come along. It really is, honestly. And that's the thing, like, we need to be going out and talking to people on the streets and convincing them, because at the end of the day, on the 18th of September, we need to get the yes vote and we need to get the turnout. And on that ballot paper, we've got the choice of 2 futures. That's it, it's just 2 futures that are on that paper. And one keeps and preserves the British state in its current form, with all of those inequalities that we've talked about, and all of that stitched up economic model that only benefits the rich. And the other option challenges those 3 centuries of union and opens up countless possibilities for the people of Scotland. And I think we should be going out and taking that message to people. You've got a choice. And at the end of one of them is a whole other Scotland.
I'll be super short, partly because there's been a lot of talk around, but largely because I'm dying for a pee. This is the best and most exciting country in Europe to be in right now by miles. It's alive. Talking, the meeting, everything. I look at it, I mean, I get up in the morning and my missus just forwards me Facebook things. It's like, my God, how many paintings can people do in one day? How many poems can they write? This is an amazing country to be in. And it's so exciting, I did 18, I'm just off the back of 18 public meetings in 4 weeks. And every one of them I go out knackered. And every one of them I come home excited and enlivened. This is an amazing place to be. I was watching the Spirit 45, the Ken Loach film. I got a wee burst of the sense of plagiarism when I looked at it, what they did and what we were trying to do with Commonweal. And then I thought, it doesn't matter, because if we can make it work again, it's worth it. And I wouldn't be lying if I said anything other than that a wee tear comes to my eye when I watch that stuff and when I see what happened in 1945 and how we turned people's lives around. And that spirit of 45 was something else, but it ain't going to be a patch on the spirit of 15 once we win this.
One of the lessons the working class can learn from the 45-51 Attlee government was that the working class set the priorities. I'm all in favour of going along with somebody else. But, you know, if you look at the history of the NHS, yes, everybody's in favour of the NHS now. That wasn't the case in 1945 to 1948. And Ireland Bevan had to use all the audacity of his socialist ideology to get the NHS through, and the support came massively from the working class people. And the reason I'm trying to talk to the working class about their talent and their power and what they can do is that for the first time, when we're the majority in Scotland, we can set the priorities, and other people have got to debate round our priorities, not us having to debate around the priorities that they impose upon us. One of the great benefits that is arising from this campaign, and that's the reason why the yes vote is going up, is that we are day by day destroying the myth that's held us captive of our own inadequacy. When they told us generation after generation, you're too poor, you're too wee, you've got to hand big cousin England your hand to keep you, Jerry Buchan actually argued at one time that we had to stay in the Union because it kept us civilised. What they have sown generation after generation is the idea that something not quite right about us and that we're inadequate to run our own country. That myth is being destroyed by us day by day by day, and that's one of the triumphs of this campaign. But go out and tell your neighbours and your workmates and everybody you can talk to, because this is a matter of moving from meetings like this with information that you have now that you might not have had before you came. But the most important point, the most important information to convey to other people is that the referendum is about power. Absolute raw power. We either keep it or we give it away. And we're going to give it away. You might not like Alex Salmon. Do you like Cameron and Clegg better?
Don't be rushing away. Back for all the people rushing away. I don't want something to happen like campus. Anyway. It's my privilege now to say one or two things about the speakers to thank Robin in his absence. Kat, of course, and Jim, and just to say to Margot, if she's still watching, that angry grandpa wasn't bad tonight. I'll speak to grandpa myself, but I'll be 12 and you only get 10. Yeah. We'd like to thank Independence Live, and in particular Kevin Gibney, for giving us the opportunity to hopefully a number of people that can't make it here tonight to get. It's a great thing to do, this live streaming. I'd like to thank David Cherry and his team for the video. We'll get that up as soon as possible. On David's hands on that one. And I want to thank the Call Centre, and in particular manager Ian and Jan Goodall, who helped to get it going tonight, and the staff who are working as we speak. I want to thank all the Yes groups, the advertising meeting, and John Adamson and his group here in Motherwell and Wishaw. Thanks to all the men and women in Yes Motherwell and Wishaw, and Awaynes, with whom we've been working, distributing papers, leaflets, etc. John, Claire, Mary, Sharon, Anne, Daniel, Andrew, John, Mary, Alan, Ben, Jamie, John, all the rest of them. There's a blog site we set up. Stuart Darling, you referred to earlier. We've got to reach back sitting there. You've got a wee blog site set up. Get yourselves some comments in there. http://manager4indie WordPress. You'll see the Facebook. And also in conclusion, I'm asking for the following. Lend your support. That's what Robin, Cat and Jam and everybody else are saying. People out in the streets every day of the week. Sometimes hearing nonsense and sometimes hearing a bit more than nonsense. But that's where we are. So we're going to lend your support. Get involved. Door-to-door canvassing is starting. Training's going to be taking place. Kat and our group have been in Trump Chapel, Easter House in big numbers, knocking doors, talking to people face to face. Watch the Yes Motherwell, watch your Facebook for the details of that. There's paper distribution to be done. Every little helps in relation to doing your own street, your own closer, your own multi-storey block. Speak to your relatives and friends, workmates, as Jim said, and give us your name and your details as you leave, in relation to if you can help. The Lanarkshire Forum for Independence is working on further events. The next one projected is a meeting for women. Again, hope to decide or undecided. In fact, as we told the date tonight, it's going to be in here on the 2nd of May. So we'll get the details and all the rest of it on that one. What's the local press and so on. Some talented members of our group, Dominic Millionaire, my eldest boy, Paul Macaulay, Paul Carr, have written and produced a song entitled Independent Land. And it can be captured. Look out at Facebook for it. We'll hope to get some CDs ready for the night, but probably ready in the morning. Just to make any money off them, but to get the message out. A tidy wee song, tidy tune. And it's going to be your signature tune. And I'll actually have for Independence. And lastly, for the first time in the meetings I've been doing, we're going to ask you to donate what you can, only if you can. And they've got a couple of buckets at the back door. So give what you can, only if you can. And just lastly, or second lastly, can you let the audience know, it says here, there are declaration forms at the table at the back, where John Adams is standing. This is last. Remember I was in the song Independent Land when you hear it. And there's a wee line there that says, turn our whispers into roars. Turn our whispers into roars. And that's the challenge between now and the 18th September. And on the 19th September, let's get the biggest roar of them all when that result comes in. And then we can set about the argument and the policies that will bring our country forward and bring prosperity to every single person here, Waynes and Grand Waynes, and we can all retire to being Jim, the way to the road. Joe and the job's done.
Okay, people, that's the end of Scottish Independence live.
Is this a live one?
Yeah, we're live just now. Say hello. Say hello. There you go. Hey, famous at last. Okay, people, we've got more live events coming up very soon, and so keep an eye on the Facebook page.
Okay. How many people tune in here?
Yeah, we've had about 200 viewers tonight. Good. That's probably means about maybe 200 people watching it. So that's pretty good. Yeah. Want to say cheerio though?